Welcome to The Difference. I'm Steve Castile, and today we're having a conversation with Susan Eaton. Susan is the discipleship minister at Parkway Heights, but she's also a podcaster. Hope you'll listen in on the conversation.
You are listening to The Difference, a presentation from The Hour, a 54-year ministry. Steve, first we started on radio, then went to television, then we went streaming online. So at Our Stream, you can watch our programming from all those years. So it's at thehour.org. And now, here we are. Well, Steve, here we are with another podcaster on the program. You were this is hopefully this is actually a good podcaster, not unlike us and what we do.
Well, you know, we're learning. She's been about it for years.
See, she's a pro,
and she does women's retreats. She does a ton of stuff, and her whole focus is on the whole idea of wellness. She's been through a series of health issues and is kind of, you and I were just talking about this. It's easy to get burned out.
Yeah.
And part of her focus is on how do we create a sustainable ministry and take care of ourselves as well as the people we're called to serve. So this conversation is really cool. And as I was listening, I felt convicted almost with everything. It's like, nope, don't do that. Nope, that's not me. Nope, maybe I need to listen to your podcast more.
Well, the name of her podcast is Embodied Holiness.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's an intriguing title. Mm-hmm. But yeah, immediately I'm thinking, oh no, feeling inferior, even going in with the name.
Embodied, ooh, holiness, uh-oh.
So she knows who she's talking to. No, I'm just
yes,
kidding.
She does.
Just kidding. No, this is exciting though, and at Parkway Heights, we both have had friends through Parkway Heights for so many years, and the Hoods there. There are just so many good people that have come through Parkway Heights, serving in ministry over the years. So it's always good to have somebody connected there.
And when we were doing the interview at the church, of course, Keith Keaton is senior pastor there. And Keith was in my youth group when I was at Morton and started his ministry there. There's a long story that I'll do an interview with him and he can tell it. He loves telling it.
And you didn't feel old at all, did you?
No, I didn't. But he's doing an incredible job there. That church there is the presence in the community in so many ways. And Susan's been a big part of that. So I can't wait for folks to listen to our conversation. Welcome to The Difference. I'm Steve Castile, and today I'm with a friend, Susan Eaton. Reverend Eaton, or should I call you Reverend Eaton?
You absolutely may. That is my title.
Is one of these people who, from afar and from up close, has a spiritual depth that has come from her life experience, and just carries a wisdom beyond her years. And so I was excited to have a chance. She has a podcast of her own. And over these last, couple of years, you've had quite a new lick to your journey. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk to you about how health, how the challenges of life really kind of stress test and stretch your spirituality. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be a guest on a podcast. I'm typically the host.
You're the host, exactly.
I have been guest on other podcasts, and it's always fun. So thank you for including me.
You're welcome. Listen, I'm excited for the conversation. So you are here at Parkway Heights. Mm-hmm. How long have you been here?
13 years.
13 years.
July 1st was 13 years.
Wow.
It has flown by.
And this is an incredible congregation.
It really is.
They are such a presence in this community, and just in the annual conference serve as really one of our flagship churches. Mm-hmm. So congratulations.
Oh, well, thank you. And I do not take for granted being at this church. It is a huge blessing. And there's so many opportunities to grow and expand, not only in the church and to help the church do that, but personally. There's an openness to your own personal growth. And I try my best to live that out.
Well, and that is an anomaly
Oh, really?
with a lot
You
of
think so?
churches.
Yeah, yeah.
To be able to have that kind of freedom and to be able to live into your best gifts. So talk to me a little bit. Just give us a little backstory. How did you get into the ministry, and then over these last few years as you've served, kind of engaged the challenges and the changes that have happened?
So when you say, how did you get into the ministry, are you talking
I'm
my
talking about
call
back
to
in
ministry
the
the very
beginning.
beginning?
God created and called.
Susan, yes. So I grew up in the church. My father was a United Methodist pastor.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Reverend Jack Neighbors was my father. Uh-huh.
No.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Dad died in 2003. So at the age of 62, I was 30 years old when Dad died. So that was a great loss,
Oh.
A significant loss. But I grew
I
up a
had
preacher's kid. You didn't know
I
this?
am flabbergasted
Are you?
because this Jack was just one of my favorite people.
Yes.
I love me some Jack Neighbors.
And I love, we were in Kentucky for 16 years, and no one knew my father in Kentucky.
Right.
And so moving back to Mississippi, it's really fun, knowing and encountering people like you who are
Right.
like, I knew your father. I loved
Exactly.
your father. So, yeah, I grew up in the church, and there's this saying, I guess, about preachers' kids that they're only there because they have to be there. And, it was an expectation that we would be in church, but I loved it. I wanted to be there. If the doors were open, I was there. A natural leader in my youth group, went to college, became a youth pastor. That was very different. I was in a sorority at Ole Miss and had a lot of fun doing that, but I was doing youth ministry on the weekends and coming back and was a student. And then my call to ordained ministry happened when I was a junior in college, and I just knew it was the thing I couldn't not do. I would do it whether I was paid or not, and I felt distinctly, and I won't go into too much detail with it, but the Lord called me, you will speak for me. It was so clear, and it has never left me. And I knew I was not equipped at 21 years old to do what I felt that deep calling was. And the Lord confirmed that and said, no, you're not ready, but you will be, and you will speak for me. And so I ended up, my husband and I met my senior year in college. I had 1 year after college before I went to seminary. We were married August 17th, and 8 days later, I was at Asbury Theological Seminary with a new name, living in a new state, and sitting in an 8 a.m. Greek class. So I did not know what had just happened.
See, how many of life's greatest stressors are that all
Right,
in one
all
bucket?
in one, all at once. So anyway, I received my Master of Divinity degree from Asbury, and then my husband, after I finished, worked on his master's in counseling from Asbury. So we have 8 years invested at Asbury
Wow.
Seminary. We stayed in Kentucky for 16 years, had both of our children in northern Kentucky, and in 2012, I got a call from Parkway Heights. Eddie Rester was the pastor at the time, and just wondered if I would be interested. And it was the right time and the right season. And you just sense when the Lord says it's time to move on and expand in new ways and grow in new ways. And I really did sense that that's what the call was. I wasn't leaving anything. I was moving into new territory, to expand myself and to see what the Lord wanted. And I never dreamed it would include writing books and hosting a podcast and doing things like that. I'd led retreats for years. Now I write and lead women's retreats. And anyway, I love being the discipleship pastor here. I get to work with all the ages. So instead of youth ministry only, it's all the ages are involved, helping people follow Jesus and develop practices in their life that will help them journey with Christ and bring them abundance.
Well, I
joy.
think that's so appropriate because it seems like in the generation of this season, there's no longer a high percentage of generational Christianity. So it's almost like you're doing youth ministry with adults,
It
picking
really
them
is.
up, and you're training in that background, in that, discipleship that's almost like, new frontier. We've heard of this, but we haven't really processed or engaged it or figured out what it entails. So that was perfect preparation for a season like this.
Absolutely.
Well, talk a little bit about. So you've been here, you're in discipleship. You've really walked into that in your own life, and now kind of moved from not only just teacher to, um, you don't want to say expert, but somebody who has garnered wisdom that's worth sharing. And you do that through your books, and you do that through your podcast. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because part of your approach is a different kind of pace than, and maybe the word is not pace. So much of discipleship feels very regimented, very
You should. You
regurgitation,
ought.
and your approach is completely different from that. Talk about that a little
Well,
bit.
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that one of the things that is not as emphasized as much as it could be, should be, in the discussion of our walk with Christ is a self-care component. Like you said, discipleship can often come across or be taught as a list of shoulds and oughts, and if you're a good disciple, you're doing all these things, and depending on your personality, that can become its own burden.
Right.
Like, God will not be pleased with me if I'm not doing these certain things. Now, I am a firm believer in spiritual practices and creating habits that are good for you to be healthy spiritually and emotionally and mentally and physically. Those have to be practices, but it is that we are body, mind, and spirit. And so the self-care component, I think, gets put aside. We focus on, oh, well, I'm supposed to die to myself. Well,
Right.
sure. Yeah. Die to your selfishness. Die to being the Lord of your own life. Die to having to have your will be done over anyone's or God's will. Die to those things. But that does not mean ignore yourself. It does not mean do not have compassion for yourself. It does not mean don't listen to your body, wear yourself out because you're giving all the time, that you never listen to what your body and your heart and your mind are saying to you. And so for me, I became ill. 2017, I was so sick I couldn't even sit in my office at my desk a full day. My joints hurt everywhere. I didn't really know what was going on at all. Saw a string of doctors, and it took about 6 months before I was finally diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. But in that process, as I prayed for healing, and as I prayed for the Lord to help me find some relief so I could do the things that I love, because I had not only physical pain, but I had brain fog. I could not think. I couldn't be creative. I couldn't focus. I couldn't even remember what I was saying while I had a conversation with someone. I would lose my train of thought in the middle of a sentence. It was just really intense. And I knew I needed to move my body. I've always been an active person, but I hurt so bad. I knew it needed to be gentle. And, I drove by this little yoga studio every day on my way home, and I sensed the Lord say, go in that little yoga studio. And I said, I've never done yoga. I don't even know what that's about. But I just followed that prompting. I followed that little sense in my spirit, and I walked in there and I started that healthy movement. I learned how to breathe. I learned how to slow down. I learned that there were ways I could move that would actually help my body heal, and that just deep breathing in and of itself was not only good for you physically, but it was a way for your mind to find peace and space. It was a great opportunity to pray. I prayed so much while I just laid on the floor and breathed after a nice long hour-long movement practice, So I found healing coming from that practice. But as I really prayed about all of it, and as my mind started opening back up, as I found that physical healing, I really realized that we are doing ourselves a great disservice when we don't listen to our bodies that way, because we really are preventing the creativity that the Spirit has for us in our minds. We're creating a
Exactly.
block when our bodies are so ill and we don't listen to that, or we're not compassionate towards ourselves. We are creating a block in our souls in many ways. And so that season really opened up for me this something I had not ever thought about. Self-care and even self-compassion was never any language that I had. It was not taught to me.
I'm
I
listening
didn't.
to you say that, and it just, there's a sweetness in it that love yourself, but self-compassion, that
Mm-hmm.
brings a depth to it that you can't just run by.
Yes. And self-compassion really is giving yourself permission to say to yourself, well, it makes sense that you're hurting because this was a deep pain. It makes sense that you are physically exhausted because you have been pouring yourself out for so many people. And it's okay for you to rest. And, take that time to rest. Take that time to do something you love, to find some joy, eat some good food, or go on a slow walk. You don't have to be exercising yourself to oblivion. You can
Exactly.
you can just get out and enjoy the breeze. You can sit in the chair and look at the trees. You can, whatever it is. But we often won't even give ourselves permission to do those kinds of slow things. Um, when I think of how Eugene Peterson approached Sabbath, his Sabbaths looked like going on a long walk in the woods and just
Exactly.
enjoying nature. He would eat a delicious meal and he would savor every bite. And sometimes we think Sabbath is, you just deny. You deny yourself and you just stop and you can't do anything fun. And that is not the intent of Sabbath. Sabbath
No.
is be restful, and often doing enjoyable things are very restful. And I think pastors are especially bad at this, and maybe anyone in sort of a caregiving role has a hard time doing what they would do for someone else for themselves. Taking a bath, taking a nap, anything like that.
I think that's, you're saying that having, being a boomer male, growing up with this kind of work ethic behind faith where, at 50 I had quadruple bypass surgery and found myself just living on the edge of stress every single day
Mm-hmm.
and baptizing it as self-sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And as I would go through my cycles, and it's a cycle because I'm constantly in recovery
Mm-hmm.
of trying to live out of that work ethic. And the rhythm that God began to share was, there are twofold commandments. One is love me with all your heart, mind, and soul and strength, but love your neighbor as yourself. You can't do your work if you're not loving
Mm-hmm.
yourself. And that was almost antithetical
Mm-hmm.
to what I thought my call was.
Mm-hmm.
I want to burn out. I want to go out in a flame and watch myself, all for Jesus. And
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is just shaking his head going, whoa, 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 whoa. Do you not remember I took time aside?
Right.
Do you not remember I understood about self-care? And
Mm-hmm.
I think we misrepresent, especially in the Western world, Jesus is going apart
Mm-hmm.
as some kind of abnormal uh,
Mm-hmm.
action. Well, I'm through. I'm tired of miracles, so I'm going to go rest just a minute so I can recharge my
It
wand and
was
my
his
powers.
regular
But it was
practice.
his lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
He did love himself as he loved others. He
Mm-hmm.
understood, and in that self-loving, truly appreciated and discovered who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the piece that if I could tell my 50-year-old self or my 45-year-old self, the conversation I would have is the gift God has given you is you.
Mm-hmm.
Live that life as well as the life you're called
Mm-hmm.
to.
Mm-hmm.
And when my doctor sat beside me after my recovery, and he said, "Now, what are you going to do differently as you go home? What are your hobbies? What do you do for fun?" And I just kind of had this deer in the headlight look of, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. Every time I did, I don't take vacations. I don't do that. I'm called to preach. It's all consuming.
Which speaks to why it is so important that we establish these habits and practices before the crisis.
Exactly.
And you know, when you're doing self-care, and yeah, a lot of it we think of as physical things, but self-care is physical, but it's also emotional and mental self-care. It is spiritual self-care. These are habits and practices, disciplines that we establish in our lives that will sustain us, not prevent pain, not prevent illness, not prevent these things, hardship, but will sustain us when we experience an illness and when we experience a hardship and when we're forced to slow down for any number of reasons. You know, the best way to change a bad habit is not to try to stop the bad habit. It's to create a new habit and practice that new habit over and over and over again. And you will change the neural pathways in your brain.
Right.
And you will no longer desire or fall into the bad habit because you have created a new neural pathway. That's the way we know to talk about it now.
Right.
You know, ancient people did not know to talk about it, but they experienced the reality of it, and it's true for us. And so when we think about as Christians who are called to be followers of Jesus, it's what you said. Jesus modeled for us not only self-sacrifice, but self-love and compassion and care. And we need to recapture that part of his life and think about how when we do those practices, we are better able to love and serve the people around you. I don't know about you, but when I do not take care of myself, I get so irritable.
Right.
And I am no good to be around anybody else. My wisdom goes out the window in large number. I mean, it's just,
Exactly.
I am not the best I can be. And I don't want to revert to beating myself up on the days when I'm not the best I can be. I mean, that's when self-compassion has to come back in, and you need to say, well, why am I having a bad day? Well, you are exhausted. You need some days to rest. And it's okay that you would say no to some things, or that, you know, but don't keep going like this, or you're going to say something that will hurt somebody. You're going to act in a way that is not who you want to be because you're tired and you didn't listen to that. But establishing these habits and practices, like I said, they don't prevent bad things, you know, from happening to us, but they do sustain us so much when those things happen. Because I've been practicing intentionally this now since 2017. So how many? Eight years. And then just last year, I was diagnosed with cancer. And while I do, quote, everything right, I eat everything I'm supposed to eat. And I really try not to eat the things I'm not supposed to eat because I know that that's good for my body. Well, cancer doesn't discriminate.
Exactly.
It can come to anyone at any time. And I'm so thankful that when I had to go through, you know, what I went through, I was already steeped in the practices of the things that would sustain me, those self-care kinds of things, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Because I don't know, it's a lot harder when you're in the midst of the crisis and your doctor says to you, okay, now what are you doing differently? And you've got to start there.
Exactly.
You know, it's much harder. So
it is hard. And I think that for me, the challenge has always been that sense of self-awareness. It's like I spent most of my life trying to be attuned to what was going on around me, what the needs were in the world and in the community, in the congregations I served. But I had no internal reflection where I was aware. Before I had my surgery, we were in the midst of building a house, living in an apartment. The church was growing at St. Matthew's. And I came home one day and Cindy was like, "What are you mad about?" And my response was, "Mad? What are you talking about? I'm not mad." And she was just sitting there big-eyed looking at me, and I was just, how can you be so not in touch with your own place, but when you're not healthy and you haven't cared for yourself? then you reach that position where your body is not even capable of being aware, because it's just so depleted that every tool you have is not usable in that situation.
And I think it's helpful for us to remember, like I've already said, that what happens to us physically affects us emotionally, affects us spiritually. How we're feeling spiritually affects us emotionally, can affect us physically. What happens to us emotionally affects us physically and spiritually. It all works together. And so wherever the flags pop up for you,
Yeah.
if you notice emotionally, I'm a wreck right now. Okay, what's going on? And you might even say, let me pay attention to my body right now. Like, how could this also be affecting my body? Well, often it lives in our shoulders
Exactly.
and our neck and our back and our hips. And so something that can help us even start feeling better emotionally and mentally is I'm going to relax my body. So I have a friend named Whitney Simpson who has a website called exploringpeace.com, and her podcast is Exploring Peace. And she writes varying lengths meditations. And so some are for the middle of the day, some are 5 minutes for the morning, some are 20 minutes to help you relax at night. But they're for mindfulness and relaxation. And so if you can't do it well on your own, you can always let someone like Whitney be your guide and put that on, but just relaxing your body and breathing and telling yourself, I'm here right now and I'm safe right now in this moment. And God is with me right now in this moment. And even small practices like that can help us start finding a little bit of a reset.
Right.
And sometimes I think we're taught, well, if you just prayed harder and had more faith and you just trusted that God's got it, give it to God, give it to God.
Exactly.
It's like, I don't even know what I'm giving. What am I supposed to give? I don't know how to do it right. Well, now I'm shaming myself because I didn't do it right. I didn't do faith right. I didn't do discipleship right. I didn't believe right. I'm not enough. And then the shame spiral starts, and then it affects us in all the other ways. So
It does. And I think that for me, John Ortberg writes in one of his books, I think it's Everybody's Normal Till You Get to Know Them, about the whole idea of humility. And he said part of what clergy really wrestle with is this sense of humility, not in the sense that we're so bodacious, but in the sense that he said humility is appropriate smallness, that we're more finite than we presume we are. We are more vulnerable than we want to be. We are more fragile than we ever desire. And that beginning to discover those things helps us find our way into better practices. And I think that I thought there came with my call an invulnerability that because I was being faithful, I could run through brick walls and not eat right, not take care of myself, not exercise, not pay attention to what was going on because I was doing the right thing. And that's like saying, I'm going to keep driving my car with no gas in it, or I'm not going to change the oil, or I don't need wheels on my car. It's totally dysfunctional.
I love that you brought up humility. The scripture the Lord has had me repeating regularly is humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you in due time.
Yeah.
Often we think, okay, I've got to fix. Even when we think about, these practices of self-care and self-compassion and discipleship and, spiritual disciplines, we got to do something. I got to do. And sometimes what we need to do is not do.
Right.
Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you in due time. Now, what that exaltation looks like is totally up to God, and that's okay because you have humbled yourself under his mighty hand.
Right.
And so that in itself is self-compassion and self-care because it releases you from being the one that has to make everything happen. It's a great reminder that you don't have to be in control of every single thing, even your own future. We have a huge role to play. We have to cooperate with the Lord. We make decisions every day in wisdom under his guidance, but we will jump ahead of him and run
Oh,
before Him.
every time.
And then that is too big of a responsibility to bear. And we cannot carry that on our own shoulders. And as soon as we try to do it, it will not be long before we are crumbling under the weight of that.
I had a member at Petal when I was pastoring there, and he had just a deep voice, almost like God. And he would come in every Monday morning, and his words, he would holler it through the secretary's office into my office: Castile, God's God, you're not. And it would just make me so mad. And I just wish I'd listened more to that, because it was, who does he think he is? And I don't think I'm God. Well, in a way, we do.
Mm-hmm.
We think that, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We hear the first part.
I can do all things.
I can do all things.
All the things.
But we forget, exactly, but we forget the back end of it,
Mm-hmm.
which is we find strength to do the things we need to do through the strength Christ brings us in our spirit and our wholeness. And I think that's where I kind of want to wind up, is that we talk about holiness and spirituality, but wholeness is really, when God said abundant life, that's really what he was trying to share, was this sense of, what I want you to be is whole. I want you to be that person whose emotions, physicality, relationships are built and lived into like you were created for.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we think we can exempt ourselves out of that. And I'm, this conversation has been so helpful to me, because, I am the world's worst at self-care. And it's, and I almost wear it like a badge, in the sense that, I can take a licking and keep on ticking, and, just do those things. And I know deep in my soul that serves nobody well.
You know what the other badge is that people will wear is, oh, I can't do that. I'm just not made like that. I can't.
Right.
And we excuse ourselves
That's
from the
it.
necessity of it.
Right.
And that's just giving up on it, I think. Have you
Exactly.
tried it? What have
No.
you tried? And do you understand it? And I think if we would all just at least take one step forward to creating a habit that will benefit us. It has nothing to do with what's going to help anybody else. It may not even be productive.
Yeah.
It may be super non-productive.
Exactly.
You're going to do something non-productive. And for the people who are the type A personalities, who productivity and action and all of that is number one, and it gives you your sense of self-worth and makes you feel valuable, and will check your identity too. Where is your identity coming from?
Right.
What if you couldn't do one more thing? Are you still enough?
Yeah.
And unless we're caring for ourselves and reminding ourselves of that truth, that our identity is first and foremost in Christ, we will get upside down in those things. And
Yeah.
then when life stops us and you cannot do the things that you're investing all your worth in and your identity in, you will feel so lost. And that may be the place that jolts a lot of people into a new way of living. It may be
Exactly.
slamming into that wall. But I'm here to say we don't have to slam into that wall before we start those practices. That you can't stop the difficulty of life, but you can certainly create an environment within yourself that is hospitable to the Spirit of God, that will sustain you when life comes hard.
That does. And, I appreciate you taking the time to walk through this. It's almost like our conversation. Well, it's not almost. It is. It's been therapeutic for me to kind of help me go back and touch. And I hope for the listeners, tell us about your podcast as we wind down.
Yeah, the podcast is called Embodied Holiness. It's about letting the life of Christ be lived out through our everyday lives. So we, therefore, can explore all sorts of topics. Sometimes we'll read a book that we love. I'm thinking most recently we read Follow the Healer by Dr. Stephen Siemens
Oh, wow.
at Asbury, and had him on to discuss the book with
How
us
cool.
and to speak about healing and how we often misunderstand that, and how we can recapture a proper understanding of healing prayer and a ministry of healing and understanding healing in our own lives. Sometimes we'll have guests on that have been through or are going through a tough time. Our friend Benson St. Louis, who was diagnosed with ALS, he and his wife Carol were on to talk about how that has affected them and how life has changed and how they're leaning on their faith through such a startling kind of life-changing diagnosis, all sorts of things. So it's beautiful and fun, and it's an opportunity to have what I call real conversations, dive into some deep waters.
Right.
We talk about studying the Bible. We talk about theology. We talk about self-compassion and self-care. We talk about all of the things. So it's fun, and hopefully those who are listening to this will go check it out.
We'll put a link on our website so that you can find that. And I do want to thank you for taking time to be on the podcast, but more than that, for being a voice for what God called you to. And, the voice was what he called, and the message is what you bring that is only a message you can bring. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Well,
good
thanks
to see
a lot.
you. And I'm glad that you found out who my father was.
I am still reeling from that, and I can't wait to tell Cindy about that. So.
Wow. Susan Eaton.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope everybody will go to her podcast and listen to Embodied Holiness. There's, it's not all heavy and dense, but it is so practical. There's so many things, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, that you can do to find yourself renewed and refreshed. And as we were having conversations, I find myself kind of open. I always think that I'm transparent, but as we talked, I felt so awkward in that those kind of conversations are not the conversations I usually have.
Yeah.
And, but part of her just core principle is that if you don't love yourself and care for yourself, you can't very well love others.
Well, and just listening to her talk, you're wanting to take notes, and say, all right, these are some things I've got to remember, put into action, embodying holiness. What a goal.
And her whole role as discipleship pastor, she takes that so seriously. It's a way of life. And that's why she's so popular. She does tons of women's retreats and has conversations with different groups about that kind of self-care. And her own personal testimony is just a reminder of how sometimes God uses us best through our brokenness.
Well, and it reminds me that we are so blessed in Mississippi with leaders like this, like Susan, like you, leaders in Mississippi where it's not that we have to go to a retreat far off somewhere to get good teaching, to get good discipleship training, to get good nuggets. All you have to do is listen to her Embodied Holiness podcast, and Susan will have wonderful things for you. So we are fortunate that we have relationships with these folks.
Exactly.
And God has just been good to put people like that in our path, and it's a joy for us to be able to share these difference makers with you.
Which is exactly why we started this.
That's it.
And so, and what's so cool is they're all so different. I meant to do that.
That was good.
Well, as we wind up today, we hope you enjoyed the podcast. We hope you'll take time to listen to Embodied Holiness and to check out Susan's ministry and what she's been doing. And we hope that as you look at your life, that you'll begin to think about how well you love and care for yourself. And as always, remember, live loved.
You've been listening to The Difference, a presentation of The Hour. The Difference is made in conjunction with and partnership with the Institute for Southern Storytelling at Mississippi College. To find out more about the Institute, and ways that we are partnering and mentoring young lives through storytelling, filmmaking, and more, visit us at southernstorytelling.mc.edu. And for more resources from The Hour and from The Difference, check us out at our Hour Stream platform with the streaming content at thehour.org. I'm Anthony Thaxton. Thanks for